In the early days of DC, predating Superman, many of the characters were closely derived from other figures from more successful stories, like how Barry O'Neill was so very close to Sherlock Holmes. This trend didn't disappear overnight when Action Comics hit store shelves and introduced Superman. In fact, the very story that followed him was clearly taking notes from another character outside the company, Mandrake the Magician. Now, we aren't here to talk about Mandrake, but I think the context is important. DC wanted their own equivalent magician hero, and they landed on Zatara. Today we're talking about Giovanni Zatara, magical superhero and father to Zatanna, covering his history within the main comics continuity. Before we begin, remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoy it, and if you like me and what I'm doing here, go ahead and subscribe. So, to the newbies, welcome, and to the oldies, welcome back. Let's talk about DC Comics. So, let's kick things off with the original version of Zatara on Earth 2. Giovanni Zatara was born as a direct descendant of Leonardo da Vinci, a man who in real life was never married, never had children, and was, well, gay, actually. But anyways, Giovanni was introduced to stage magic by his grandfather, Luigi, who himself was a stage performer of some repute. Luigi gave him a starter magician kit at 15, and Giovanni became obsessed with the hobby. Inspired by the gift, Giovanni grows up wanting to become a stage magician like his grandpa, but runs into some trouble. He sucks. He rethinks his act and starts looking through old family items for inspiration when he runs across a journal by Leonardo himself. Now, dumb comic book moment. Da Vinci wrote the journal in Italian, with each word written backwards as the world's flimsiest security measure. Giovanni quote-unquote translates the reversed words, not even understanding that it's Italian, and they transfer into backwards English, which is not even close to how that works. And when Zatara finds out from that if he says any words backwards out loud, the thing he says comes to pass in real life. Oy. And through this process, Giovanni learns how to do real magic, and decides to use this opportunity to re-debut himself on stage. Being the 1940s, he does the actually very real thing of the time of changing his name to something more American. In his case, from Giovanni to John. Day one, performing with real magic under his belt, a fire breaks out on stage from a separate set of circumstances. Zatara puts out the fire, saving the theater and the people inside, and realizes that instead of just performing, he could help those in need with his newfound abilities. And he does so as Zatara, Master Magician. Then we move along to his next iteration from Earth 1. This version of Giovanni has an identical origin, but somewhere along the way he also inexplicably makes friends with Thomas Wayne because all roads in DC lead to Batman. Zatara carries on with his shtick of being a world-traveling magician who does actual magic and makes a few enemies here and there, one of whom seems inconsequential at first, King Inferno. This fiery figure only lightens Zatara's door once, but sets in motion the first domino in a series of life-altering events for our magically inclined friend. So they're in a classic wizard duel dust-up sort of situation in Turkey, and the two of them produce a rock slide. Giovanni is caught up in the disaster and gets hurt. Like, really hurt. He's recovered from the rubble by a local named Cindella, a woman with powerful magic abilities all her own. She nurses him back to health, and cue the Florence Nightingale romance. Cindella and Giovanni fall passionately in love, get married, and have a child together named Zatanna. Not long after Zatanna's birth, Cindella dies tragically in a car accident. This was revealed to be a faked death, which, no surprise there. But the important note is that Giovanni at this point believes her to be dead. Then, as a cherry on top, the Waynes get shot in an alley. Giovanni finds comfort in drink. Lots of it. His alcoholism persists for over a decade, which I'm sure helped Zatara become a perfectly well-adjusted woman. Bruce Wayne shows up, everybody clap, and he asks Giovanni to train him in deception and escapology. Giovanni, galvanized by the super cool and powerful charisma of Batman, immediately drops his vices and never drinks again. Because dropping an addiction is super easy and not a journey with valleys and peaks. Around the time Zatara burgeons into adulthood, Giovanni gets in yet another wizard duel dust-up, this time with the extra-dimensional Allura. He wins, but Allura is a sore loser and curses him on the way out, saying that if he interacts with his daughter in any capacity, only death will follow. The two, for Zatara's entire life, have been incredibly close, so this comes as an utterly disheartening blow. Giovanni can't even explain the situation to his daughter, lest the worst happen, so he literally dips out of the earthly plane of existence and sets out to find a counterspell on his own. The adventure that follows is more Zatara's story than it is Giovanni's, but she eventually sets things right and saves her father from the curse, reuniting them once again. Giovanni is thankful and heartened by his daughter's actions, and decides to hang up his top hat and stay out of harm's way in the future. He even opens up a magic shop for young magicians. Giovanni actually remains retired, too. He and Zatara eventually uncover that Cindella is still alive, only to have her die to save their lives. It's permanent this time, and also barely acknowledged going forward. Then, after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, we get to the Giovanni Zatara of New Earth. Everything I've mentioned before is still in play, since Zatara's history didn't need a particularly high amount of finagling to fit into the 80s timeline. This version of Zatara only really gets one more notable appearance in this reality. Well, at least in the corporeal sense. Giovanni is summoned alongside some high-level mystics, such as Zatanna, John Constantine, Mento, Baron Winters, Sargon the Sorcerer, and Dr. Occult. Mento isn't really magic-based, but he's more so there to get everyone on the same mental wavelength with his psychic superpowers. They get together along with a second team of more physically focused figures to combat the Great Darkness, an entity that is literally biblical in proportion. When the big man said, "Let there be light," the Great Darkness is what retreated. It goes. The universe doesn't end, which is a victory, but Sargon and Giovanni burst into flames and die. In Giovanni's case, it's in direct view of his daughter, and more specifically, he sacrificed himself to save her from death. Though this is the end of his physical existence, Zatara's ghost manifests once or twice, in one instance getting to say a less abrupt goodbye to Zatanna, but that's essentially the end of this version of our Mystic Man. When we get to Prime Earth, Giovanni's history is still primarily the same, but with one or two modifications. Firstly, that group of mystics from their tussle with the Great Darkness was rewritten to be a pre-existing organization called the Cult of the Cold Flame, a gathering that Zatara founded alongside a few others before he resigned and grew to resent it because the vibe was off. Second, Giovanni knew about an aspect of the Great Darkness in advance, specifically an avatar called the Upside Down Man. He set some things in place should he die before the eldritch entity could come to threaten Earth, and, well, he did. So now it's Zatanna's problem. But that's, again, more her story than it is his. At this point, Giovanni Zatara has shuffled off into the afterlife, only a memory held dearly in the heart of his daughter. And that's where we'll leave our story for now. If you really enjoyed the video, hopefully enough to have left a like and subscribed, you'll be happy to know that we also have a video available here on DC's first mystic hero, Dr. Occult. Thanks for sticking with us, I'll see you in the next one.